So since my last video, we've basically been told the future of Dragon Ball and that things are coming, and potentially they'll even be announced this January. The YouTuber curse of making a video on a topic only for it to need an update video a week later continues, I guess. But it's not really the topic I want to talk about today. I have something a bit more interesting to ask. When should Dragon Ball end for real? Now, I'm not talking about things like video games or merch. I'm talking about an anime series, a manga, movies even. When should animated Dragon Ball come to a conclusion? And let's start off with the obvious answer. It was 1996. We're many years past that now at this point. I know we're approaching 30 years past that. How do I know? I was born in 1996, but 1996 should have been the year that the series ended. Now, some of you out there probably know that Dragon Ball GT ended in 1997. Hence why I said 1996. I think it should have ended with the original manga. The anime ends with the manga. Toei doesn't make a continuation. We wrap up the story and we call it a day. We leave it as the peak series that it was, the influential series that it was, and we keep it in the place and time that it most made sense. But instead, we don't live in that world. Obviously, financially, it makes sense for me to want the series to continue because this is my job, but it really is the truth. I would have made my life work out without Dragon Ball being a continuing series that I could make YouTube content about. Trust me, I think I could have figured it out. But, even with my financial incentive to say, no, it actually really shouldn't have ended in 1996, I can't bring myself to lie about it. The best time for Dragon Ball to have ended is just objectively 1996. Then maybe 1997, the latest if you want to include GT, but even then I'd say that's too late. I'm not saying they couldn't do little animated things along the way, by the way, like an anniversary special every 10 or so years. That's fine, I guess. But I think overall, things like continuing the series in any meaningful way, even things that are written directly by Toriyama, even drawn by Toriyama. So I'm talking things like Jocko, the Galactic Patrolman manga with the bonus chapter of Dragon Ball Minus, directly drawn and written by Toriyama. Yo Son Goku and Friends Return, which was written by Toriyama, we don't know in what capacity, but does have a manga version, though that wasn't drawn by Toriyama, it was supervised by him and seemingly, again, written by him. I'm not saying these things are necessarily bad or anything. I don't particularly like Minus, but I really like Jocko and I really like Yo Son Goku. There are issues with both, but I really like them both individually. I'm just saying, if you really wanted to have the perfect capstone to Dragon Ball, you just end it back in 96. And I don't think that's very controversial. But obviously, that didn't happen. So let's talk about the realistic answers about when Dragon Ball should end, what still needs to be covered, and what we need to see before the series ending really makes sense. Now, I will say, after Toriyama's passing, I think wrapping up Dragon Ball as soon as possible is for the best. Financially, is it for the best for Toei, Shueisha, or other interested parties? No, but is it the best for us as fans who want something to be a completed work that gets to at least have some level of its legacy retained without it being tainted by modern works that may be of lesser quality? Yeah, I think we deserve that. So there are two big things that really need to happen for this series to wrap up in an effective way, if you ask me. The first is a Black Frieza arc. If a Black Frieza arc never happens, then there was no point to anything. Black Frieza needs to be handled. Frieza needs to be dead. He's the only real recurring Dragon Ball villain besides maybe you could say Pilaf, but even Pilaf is sort of like a gag recurring villain. The Red Ribbon Army are a recurring group of characters, but they're not the same recurring characters each time. So Frieza being the really one and only recurring villain of the series is kind of annoying. And I think it's time for him to be put to bed for good. Then, of course, many people know this with Dragon Ball Super Superhero, we're getting dangerously close in terms of timeline to the end of Z. Now, the end of Z, I think, works about 90% with current Dragon Ball. There's little things like the amount of time since Goku and Bulma have last seen each other that needs to be slightly changed by literally 1 year. She says 5 years, it's been 4, okay. But besides that, as long as those little details are touched up and fixed up, I don't think we need to change End of Z too much. And I think more importantly, we can revisit End of Z from a different perspective. If you notice, at End of Z, there aren't characters that were introduced in Dragon Ball Super. Shocker, I know. But those characters have to be doing something, have their own POVs that are happening concurrently with what's going on at the tournament. So maybe something like a Beerus and Whis POV, maybe a Broly POV, some other characters in the world and universe that we know currently exist, what they're doing, how their lives are going as the series sort of comes to its original conclusion. I think it could be a pretty touching and interesting way to tie these things together and tie the work that Toriyama did on Dragon Ball Super into his work that he did, of course, on his original manga. Now, those two are the ones that I think need to happen. But there's some other stuff that I think is been set up that doesn't necessarily need to happen, but it would be ideal if it did. The first of these is Planet Sadala. Ever since the Universe 6 tournament, we know that Vegeta is supposed to go to Planet Sadala and meet the king and handshake him, and they're supposed to be similar, and something's gonna happen. But the issue with that arc is, what's the threat? What's the issue? Who's the protagonist? What's the story? Is the story a character-driven one? Will that resonate with fans if it's purely a character arc for Goku and Vegeta meeting their people in a different universe where things went better? It could be interesting, especially for someone like me, but I don't know if a broader Dragon Ball fan will latch onto it without having a big spectacle fight that makes sense. Maybe don't have Goku and Vegeta handle a main threat here and leave it to Caulifla, Kaba, and Kale. I could see any number of ways of doing this, but I do think we should tackle this Planet Sadala mini arc or arc at some point. It's something that's just such a dangling plot thread, and unlike Toriyama's, little dangling one-liners of like Goku being an alien or the Red Ribbon Army not being fully defeated, that could be ignored because maybe, Oolong's just joking and the Red Ribbon Army might never return because they had such a humiliating defeat. This is sort of a really on-the-nose plot point that needs to occur at some point. Even if it's short, even if it's off-screen, to be honest. I would prefer it would be on-screen, but it has to be addressed and taken care of at some point in the narrative, if you ask me. The next one that I think is even more important is a Beerus rematch, and surpassing Beerus at the very least. Ever since Dragon Ball was revitalized with Battle of Gods, obviously the first thing to come back was the Yosun Goku special, but the real revitalization happens with Battle of Gods. Ever since Battle of Gods, we've had this idea of the prophecy, the greatest rival for Beerus, the Super Saiyan God. But that stuff has sort of fallen to the wayside, at least in the anime's version of events, though the manga, Toyotaro, has kept this sort of in the back of his mind constantly, with a spar between Beerus and Vegeta in the manga being entirely fueled by Beerus not believing that the Oracle Fish is correct about him having rivals in Goku and Vegeta. And even in the few chapters before Toriyama's passing, we had that big fight on Beerus's planet where everyone was brawling with each other to see who's stronger than who and how strong everyone has gotten, and to help Broly learn to control his power and such. And Beerus is constantly making comments alongside Whis about who could replace him as the next God of Destruction. Something I talked about in a main channel video, but people seem to not think is a real plot point that's in the manga and anime. No, it's there. It's a real plot point. I promise I didn't pull it out of my ass for a cool video, though it was a cool video. You should watch it if you haven't yet. So I do think that does need to happen, because I think the end of the series being a Beerus rematch to sort of full circle the events could actually work really well. I do think the best time for a Beerus rematch to have happened was at the end of the Tournament of Power, when Goku unlocks Ultra Instinct, this thing that even Beerus couldn't do. And in most cases, when Goku unlocks something, he usually has access to it pretty much immediately and permanently. So you could have had it written in a way where now he understands how to use Ultra Instinct at will. Obviously, that is different than the manga version of the events. I completely understand that. I'm talking from an anime POV on this subject, but I do think after the Tournament of Power could have been a good time for Goku and Beerus to have the rematch and for Beerus to be officially surpassed. I really don't see the reason why he has to stay top dog for as long as he has, because all it makes you think is, wow, Beerus really should have handled this. He is a crappy God of Destruction, despite knowing he's a crappy God of Destruction and has to fight harder for his universe to be a higher mortal level. It's really an interesting thing. So I would say those four things are the things, like the first two have to happen. The second two, the Planet Sadala and Beerus rematch, they kind of have to happen, I would say. But let's be honest, that's not what's going to happen. There's a multiverse to explore. There's tournaments to be had. There's beings yet to be surpassed by any character in the series as far as we know. So there's plenty of stuff for Toei and Toyotaro and Shueisha to come up with and cram into this series until they probably run it dry. Now, do I think that's the best approach? No, but do I think we will stop at End of Z and this will be wrapped up neatly? As much as I would hope that this could be wrapped up in a neat way and call an end to Dragon Ball in a respectful and honorable way to Toriyama's legacy, I'm not sure if we're going to get that. It might just come down to the money, and we might just have Dragon Ball forever. But even I don't know if I want that. Maybe if the stories are good, maybe if there's some sort of change that makes it interesting and keeps it interesting. But for right now, I'm at the very least skeptical of a world where Dragon Ball goes beyond the end of Z, where Dragon Ball goes beyond these established story beats that feel like they need to be finished, rather than story beats that are made up to forcibly continue this story. But let me know what you think in the comments below. That's all I have to say for now. See you later.